Good morning, Professor my name is Madeline Reina, and I'll be presenting my intercultural project. Um, I did my intercultural project based on, I wanted to focus on the influence that the Muslim religion and Arabic culture has on parenting, education, mate selection, and on gender roles. So about my interviewee, I interviewed Anna. She is 33 years old. She's a Patterson resident. She is married, has 4 children. She is currently a William Patterson University student, and she's an education major. English is her first language, and Arabic, specifically the Levantine dialect, that's the language she uses, that's her second language, and she's a Sunni Muslim. Anna, she was born in the United States, but her family is from Palestine, so she has Palestinian roots. Parenting. During the interview, Anna described how her parents growing up, they were very strict with her. It was their way or no way. She had no say. When her parents would say something, she wouldn't have a choice but to obey them. Her parents never really gave her an explanation as to whether she was getting punished or why she couldn't do certain things. But as a mom now, being that she's a mother of 4 children, one is 14 years old, one is 11, one is 5, and one is 3. She described that she's less strict with her children, with her own children, than her parents were with her. And she explained that, she gives her children an explanation as to why they can't do things or why they can do things. And she described her parents' way of parenting more culture-based, so they were based, they focused their parenting on culture rather than religion. And she described herself as more religiously oriented rather than culturally. Education and culture. Anna described that in her time, getting married was more of an accomplishment than getting an education. So getting married was her first priority, and getting an education, well, that came after. So she got married at 18 years old. She had her first child at 19 years old. She started college in 2009. She took a big gap, and then went back to school in 2015. So in 2009, she was about 23 years old when she started school. And the reason why she had that long gap was because she got pregnant and she had marital issues with her husband. Now, mate selection. Anna described the process of selecting a mate based on her culture and religion. So the way she described it is that the male had to go, her husband now, had to go to her house and meet her parents first, and the parents had to kind of interview her husband to see if her husband and her were compatible in order to get married. Dating is not allowed in her culture and her religion. Her parents wanted her to marry a Sunni Muslim and wanted her to marry someone from Palestine. She had no choice with that. So he had to go to her house and ask for her hand in marriage, and her parents had to approve of it first. She described that she was engaged with her husband for about 6 months before they got married. I asked her if they were allowed to go out before getting married, and she said yes, they would go out, but they would go out with a cousin or with someone else to make sure that nothing, in quotes, would happen. So marriage is kind of like a must. There's no dating. And her husband is 9 years older than her, and her husband is allowed to have another wife or multiple other wives. Now, gender roles. She described, while she was growing up, she described that her parents were very sexist She has 5 siblings. She has 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and she described her parents being very sexist in the way that the girls always had to do the chores. The girls, everything was on the girls, and the boys were allowed more freedom, and they were allowed to do basically whatever they wanted, where the girls weren't allowed to do that. And I asked her about her religion, and I asked her if she has to go to the mosque every week. And she said that for women, it's not mandatory for them to go to the mosque every weekend. It's only mandatory for them to go to the mosque 2 times a year, and it's on a holiday. But the men in her religion are required to go to the mosque every week, and their holy day is on Friday. The man has to provide for the woman and the children, so it's the man's job to go out and work. She said that she is not willing to go out and work to support her family because that's her husband's job. So she said that in her whole lifetime she's only worked like a part-time job, but that she's never really worked. So now she's currently a full-time student. She said that basically the man's money is for the family, like the family and the woman, and the woman's money is her own money. So the woman has the choice to do whatever she wants with the money. I always, before interviewing Anna, I always thought that Muslim women never really had a say or never had a voice when it came to being like in a marriage or with their family. I always felt that women were always like put down in the Muslim culture, in the Muslim religion. But after interviewing Anna, I learned that women do have a say, and women are allowed to kind of speak up for themselves. It just depends on what circumstances. So a little bit about religion. Anna does wear a hijab, and she explained that the hijab is meant to cover a woman's beauty, because in the time of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, women were getting raped. So kind of the hijab and covering, the woman's body was kind of a way of protecting the woman from getting raped. So she describes her religion. She basically says that she tries to live her life based on how the Prophet Muhammad lived his life. She prays 5 times a day. She is allowed in her religion. She is allowed to marry cousins. So she has to wear the hijab when she's around her cousins, when she goes out, when she's around other men. But she doesn't have to wear the hijab with her brothers, or in her house with her husband, or with her father. And she described a big difference between her Muslim religion and her Arabic culture. She described her family being more culture-based, and she described herself being more religion-based. She said that some of her cousins do not wear the hijab, some of her cousins do not follow the religion, but that her own family in her household, they're more religion-based. I asked her about her children and about mate selection and how she would go about that with her own children, and she said that her and her husband would allow her children to marry anyone, that they could marry anyone outside the Arabic culture. So it could be an American person, a Spanish person, an Asian person, but that the person has to convert to become a Sunni Muslim. So she said that was the difference between her parents and her own parenting, and as far as mate selection goes. So the connection, all of this, connecting it to the class. So the parenting styles, I connected it, her parents' parenting style was very authoritarian, and her own parenting style was authoritative. Anna has a very strong ethic of community. She feels very strongly about her role as a mother, as a wife, as a person in her community. she has a very, very, very strong ethic of divinity, being that she said that she lives by how she tries to live her life based on how the Prophet Muhammad lived his life, but not so quite, not an ethic of autonomy. She didn't really base everything on herself. It was more as in her her roles in life. She comes from a very high context culture where things don't have to be explicitly said for you to know them. And as far as mate selection, she has a very low relational mobility, where she doesn't really have the choice to have different relationships or be in different relationships, because it's assumed that she's gonna marry, that she's not allowed to date, so it's only with one man. Now, compare and contrast with similarities and differences between my culture and Anna's culture and religion. So some similarities, the importance of ethic of divinity in our lives. I am Christian, and I try to live my life based on how Jesus lived his life. Similarly, where Anna tries to live her life just as the Prophet Muhammad tries to live his life. We were both born here in the United States. I have Dominican roots. She's from Palestine, so she has Palestine roots. But we were both born in the United States. And the only difference is how our cultures influence us. We're both pursuing a college degree. So we're both doing that. Some differences, I can choose who I want to marry. My parents don't say, oh, the guy I marry has to be Dominican or has to be Christian. My parents really allow me to date and allow me to marry whoever I want, whereas Anna, her mate selection, process is very different than mine. Now, education is my priority right now, and when Anna was my age, her priority and what was important for her at the time was to get married, whereas to me, it's getting an education first and then getting married. And my parents growing up were authoritative, not authoritarian, whereas Anna's parents were authoritarian when she was growing up. And I live in a low context culture where, where communication styles are different than Anna's culture. Now, I did some research and I found that Palestinians have the highest education rate in the Middle East, and in the United States, approximately 35% of Palestinian men and 11% of women have at least a college degree. So even though Anna, it was important for Anna to get married, it was also important for her to get a college degree. She said that her husband has a college degree and her husband is an accountant. So for her, it was also important to get a college education, even though she got married first, but education was also important for her. And it says that in families that remain the most traditional, prohibitions on dating, limits on friendships with non-Palestinians, and even extensive restrictions on the style of dress are all used to limit the influence of American culture. When they exist, though, these conditions are much more likely to be applied or even more severely applied to girls than boys. As in most largely rural cultures, the family is the most important unit in Palestinian society. So going back to the ethic of community and how Anna is very, she feels very strongly about her roles, it comes to show how important her family is to her. Moving forward, my personal reflection, I very much enjoyed interviewing Anna. It gave me an opportunity to not only reflect and learn about her culture, but kind of reflect on my own culture and appreciate the different cultures that there are and the diversity of cultures. And like I said previously, I always thought that Muslim women were put down and that they didn't have a say. Um, but Anna explained to me that when she had marital issues, she was actually separated from her husband for years. And I asked her if women in her culture and her religion were allowed to divorce, and she said yes, as long as they have a legitimate reason to. For example, if the husband is not providing, if the husband is cheating, if the husband is mistreating her. So, before interviewing Anna, I never knew those things because I always thought that women were allowed to divorce or women weren't allowed to, in quotes, put their foot down. And it wasn't until that, Anna put her foot down while she was separated from her husband that things changed. She described the beginning of her marriage. She described that she was a slave to her husband and to her husband's family. And after their separation, things changed. Now in their relationship, they balance things out. Whereas before, it wasn't the case. And she described that in her religion, many older men look for younger women because they can kind of mold them into the culture, and convert them, into being a slave. But she said it's not always the case. So that was one very important thing that I learned from this whole experience. And I put here my personal reflection. Interviewing Anna was a fascinating cultural learning experience, which enabled me to better understand the Arabic culture and Muslim religion and to appreciate the differences and similarities it shares with my own culture and religion. Before this experience, I always thought that Muslim women were put down and had no say in anything. Anna is a woman who I admire for who she is, where she comes from, and everything that makes her who she is. I learned that instead of assuming things about a culture, one should take the time to learn about all the different, all about the culture and appreciate it for all that it is and all that it has to offer. And I put a quote here. It says, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." And these are my references. Thank you.